And welcome. My name is Ryan Belmore. I am the owner of What's Up Noop, and we are here today with another one-on-one, a conversation with an ongoing series that we launched just a couple months back, and we've been chatting with a wide variety of people. And joining us today to conduct this interview is What's Up Noop's news editor, Frank Prosnitz. And Frank Prosnitz is there. And good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon. How are you? Actually, it's morning.
Morning.
How perceptive I am.
Yes, and it is a good morning, and I just want to, for a programming note, I want to let people know that tomorrow we'll be doing another one of these. We'll be at 10 a.m. and we'll be chatting with Rick Lombardi, who is a Middletown Town Council member who just announced yesterday that he'll be running for District 74 in the House against Deborah Ruggiero, who also announced that she is running. So we'll be chatting with Rick Lombardi tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And Frank Prosnitz, tell me a little bit about the conversation we are going to have today once our guest joins us.
Yeah, that'd be good. Casby Harrison is a very interesting individual. I've known him for a number of years. He's an African-American lawyer, black lawyer, who was in the Sundlun administration for a while. He was he also was at I believe it was Leach and Seminoff, where he rose to partner level after his if my timing is correct, after his time at the State House. He ended up going and opening up his own firm, and for a while was up in an area where there were a lot of lawyers, a lot of high-end lawyers. And then Casby chose to go back to his roots a little bit, back to South Providence, and ended up opening an office there, and opened the office there, and was I saw that was interesting. Is that a new pet?
It is.
So Casby went to open the office in South Providence to serve a lot of the people there, and that community, as well as other clients. But I really was always impressed that Casby went back to the community. One of the things I had always heard about a lot of professionals who were successful in their community, they left the community. They weren't the role models, and he became a real role model for a lot of kids there, and still is. So I applaud him for that. Also, a very capable lawyer, and of a small breed of black lawyers in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so we're just waiting for Casby to join us here in the next couple of minutes. And we are setting up a wide variety of conversations like this, the one-on-one series. And we invite people to join us for them.
Well, why don't you?
Yes. Yeah. So, oh, man. Let me see here. I had Casby's website for more information. And Harrison Law Associates, and it's CasbyHarrison.com is where you can find it.
Yeah, so let's hope he joins us. That he confirmed, so that would be good. I'm also trying to get a hold of Len Ladero. I've known Len for a long time. Len is the economist at the University of Rhode Island, who is he puts together a consumer confidence index, if you will. Is not exactly what he calls it, and he measures the Rhode Island economy. Well, as everybody can tell, that come this COVID-19, we took a dive like everybody else did, and apparently a further dive as well. So it's Len always has this theory. He calls it FILO, first in, last out, being Rhode Island is the first into a recession and the last out of a recession. And so while we're not the first into this recession, we're one of many, I guess. He still believes that we're going to be last out. So we're going to try to get to Len to join us on one of these broadcasts also. Really interesting individuals, great great perspective of the Rhode Island economy. And the other piece that we need to be talking about is how do we make up a gap of $800 million in a few short weeks? That's the challenge of this administration. And some of the charges they've asked schools to have smaller class size while school budgets are being are not being increased. They can only remain the same. So there have been a number of teacher layoffs. You want smaller class sizes. You want schools to open up in the fall. You under the guidelines, you're not going to put many more than 12 kids in a school bus. So a lot of challenges ahead.
Yeah,
but I must say that educators I've spoken to say, okay, we did it with the distance learning. We'll do it now. So a great optimism.
And if anybody out there knows, we're trying to set these up on a very regular schedule. If anybody knows of any people in the community, neighbors, they don't have to be an elected official or somebody very prominent. Everybody has a story to tell. So if you know of somebody that we should be chatting with and has a unique perspective or fun story or great story, or just more people should know about this person or know about this person's background, certainly let us know. And it's ryan@whatsupnoop.com, and we will get it set up.
One of the things you mentioned, which I think is really important, is everybody has a good story to tell. There are some people are really reluctant to do that, and what they're depriving people is of the opportunity to really share that. I'll give you an example. A group of us go up on we haven't done it in a while, but on Fridays we would meet for lunch up at the Italo American Club in Providence. I'm one of the few non-Italian members of the club. One of the guys who joins us at lunch every week is Julio, who just turned 100. And Julio is sharp as a tack. And I've wanted to tell his story, and Julio says, there's nothing interesting about me. Lived in the same house most of his life, so he's seen that neighborhood change. He spent, it was in World War II, is in Italy during World War II, all kinds of things. Hey, Casby.
Good morning.
Good morning, Casby.
Wow, you popped up like magic.
Well, yeah, it's always a hit or miss whether I can join soon, but I did it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as you can see, Casby Harrison has joined us. Casby, how you been?
Fantastic. My health is great, and my optimism is rising too.
Wow, good. I want to talk about that. Tell us a little bit about your background first. I told them about the criminal. I'm only kidding. Your time in the State House, your time with it was at Leach and Seminoff, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which then merged to become Tillinghast, Leach and Seminoff, and about a 40 lawyer firm.
And you rose to partner in that firm, correct?
I did in the late 90s.
So one of the very few Black lawyers to be able to do that. Is it David Cooper, who was president of the Black Lawyers Association? And I remember when I was at Providence Business News doing a bunch of stories and realizing that in all of Rhode Island, there may have been 40 to 50 Black lawyers altogether, and very few that, unless they were in their own firms, that were able to rise to the level of partner. Certainly an uphill climb and difficult at the time, I know, and I don't know if it's changed, to get the attention of some of the major corporations to turn around and say, that's the person I want to do my legal work. Many very, very capable individuals.
Yeah, making partner as an African American is very difficult all across America, and part of it has to do with the requirement to be able to bring in business to the firm, and so.
Hey, Ryan.
And there's also issues of cultural compatibility, But I had a great experience with the law firm I was with for 15 years. Ultimately, I just wanted to be my own man and go my own way. And I have never regretted the last 21 years being self-employed.
Now you went first. First, you had you were up in I guess a more traditional area for lawyers. It was right off of right around Benefit Street in that area, correct?
Oh, that's where the law firm was, on Park Row, right near the Roger Williams National, the
Right, I
federal.
remember that, but I thought when you first opened your own firm, you were in a different location.
Oh, when I first opened my own firm, I had two locations. One was on South Main Street,
I
and
knew there was a name to that street.
yeah, and I had some office space in the firm of Ursillo, Tights, and Rich, and then I had an office, also my current office, 807 Broad Street in South Providence. So I had the South Providence office for the brother man and the South Main office for the man.
Yeah. And then you decided to bring everything to South Providence. And that building, if I'm correct, is owned by, not that it's the tribal council or something like that.
Yes, it's the Rhode Island Indian Council, and I think it was around maybe around 1995 when the St. Joe's operated the Steer House Home for Aged Men since 1896, and then they relocated to the Rhode Island Hospital campus, and it was an insurance liability for them, so they conveyed this building, 807 Broad Street, to the Indian Council for $1 in the mid-90s. And Darrell Waldron, the executive director of the Rhode Island Indian Council, has turned this 4-story, huge facility into a resource for the community. And there's all kinds of nonprofits and pedestrian traffic. And there's recently a food pantry that operates out of the building as well.
So Casby, let me go back further. Where were you brought up?
I claim the state of Virginia as my home, Springfield, Virginia, in Fairfax County, 20 miles south of DC. I grew up on Army bases in Kansas and Germany and Texas and New Jersey, and have my father's roots are Tuskegee, Alabama, and my mother's roots are Lafayette, Indiana.
What brought the family to Rhode Island, or did you just come to Rhode Island?
It was a freckle-faced Cape Verdean girl I met at Antioch School of Law in Washington, D.C., and I got engaged to her in Washington, and then she told me about great housing in Rhode Island, and I got the job offer at Levy, Goodman, Siminoff, and Gorn, which at that time was about a 25 lawyer firm. And so it was my wife who brought me to Rhode Island, and that's something I hear a lot.
Well, I prescribe to the old adage that she who must be obeyed. So whatever she says, you do, right? So.
Well, when I had moved 14 times by the time I started high school. So when I got to Rhode Island, I was more than content to remain in one place for a while. And now it's 36 years.
So Casby, tell me, as you were growing up in these various different places, your experiences as an African-American boy growing up into an African-American adult.
Well, overall, I feel like the experience of living on Army bases was much more democratic and accepting than non-military bases. I do remember leaving an Army base in Germany and going what they call on the economy on a bicycle and being chased by about 9 or 10 German boys and who definitely wanted to harm me and were yelling "Schwarze, Schwarze." But as a young man, mostly as a teenager, is when I had most of my worst experiences with law enforcement, and I used to get stopped. It seemed like almost like on a weekly basis as a teenager. But now that I have gray hair and a bit of gravitas, my interactions with law enforcement are very civil and uncontroversial.
So I do a radio show down in Wesley, and I finished up early this morning. And following me, there's a minister who does a show, and I don't, to be honest, I don't listen to it as I leave the station. But today I left it on, and he was talking about and surprisingly, it usually talks about religion and ministerial stuff, but he was talking about what was going on in this country, and he amazed me a little bit by talking about how great the police were, and how just because of one incident we shouldn't throw the police departments. We shouldn't defund all of these police departments. And what surprised me a little bit is I would have expected someone in that, and this individual in particular, to have much more sensitivity about some of the history and the realization we're not talking about one individual.
Well, I can speak to both what is going on in the country and what is going on in Providence, Rhode Island. I have served for the past 14 years on the Providence Police Advisory Board. I have known the last three chiefs of the Providence Police Department and their commissioner of public safety. And I've worked with them very closely in establishing an advisory board comprised of 20 or 30 community leaders. And there has been a lot of trust built up and a sense that one of the reasons why Providence has avoided, for the most part, having members of the minority community protesting Providence prior to George Floyd is because the department has been proactive in holding police officers accountable for excessive force and providing proper training and being out in the community, establishing relationships. So I am supportive of the Providence Police Department. I am mindful when there are incidents that raise concerns to make inquiries with Black police officers about their take on whether a white officer is a problem or instead has behaved in a manner that is an aberration, and whether or not an officer who's accused of abuse has an unblemished career or many complaints. So that makes a difference. But absolutely, on a bigger picture, police abuse of the minority community has been rampant. I mean, I don't think I know a single person of color who doesn't have, if not one, multiple stories of having harmful run-ins with police departments. And part of it is that our entire lives, we have been unconsciously brainwashed by media, by books, by schools, that Black is bad, Black is dangerous, and so it's almost unconscious that there's this heightened fear or heightened suspicion that something is going to go bad when police officers interact with people of color. And it's a very strange phenomenon. I'm convinced that there are plenty of people whose concept of a stereotypical African American or Hispanic is one of danger and fear.
Do you how do you respond to this defund the police movement, and how do you define it differently? Because it's not defunding and eliminating the police. To me, it's redefining the police.
Obviously, there are bad people out there that a police department needs to arrest and protect the community. So we can't eliminate the police department, but we do need to de-emphasize punishment and incarceration and start emphasizing treatment and corrective, what do you call it? Where you're helping people to become better. And so having people who are trained on how to deal with mental illness and how to deal with drug addiction and putting more money into housing for the homeless and helping the poor, I do agree that we need to redirect resources towards social services, and some of that can come at the expense of stop spending money on weapons of mass destruction for police officers.
Well, we of course asked a police officer to do far more than a police officer should do. And so it was Al Sharpton who recently defined this movement as redirecting funding toward community policing, mental health services, police training, and intervention. And others have done the same. And then there's the example of Camden in New Jersey that actually defunded the police department. The New Jersey has a pretty substantial county government. But they ceded all of the police functions, the typical police functions, to the county police, beefed up the county police department, reinvested money into more teachers, into mental health, into restorative services, into community resilience departments, into social workers, government resource liaisons, all of those things. And as a result, Camden, which used to have a pretty high criminal rate, if you will, crime rate, it's plummeted under this kind of program, because they still have a robust police force. They're very careful about who comes on that force, that they meet the criteria they have. They hired about 100 of the city police into that new police force if they were able to meet the standards. And then they have all these other things that are providing those services. It sounds like I'm on that side, but I clearly think it works, and it's a great example.
I think that one of the more significant changes that needs to be made with police departments is breaking the code of silence and requiring officers who witness abuse to report abuse and to intercede. I was told just yesterday by a friend of mine that, and I don't remember what state or city this occurred, but there was a Black female officer who observed her partner making a chokehold, and she tried to stop him. And ultimately, the officer who did the chokehold was not disciplined, and the Black female officer who tried to stop the chokehold was terminated. I think that if officers know that there will be consequences because their coworkers won't sign false statements to protect their abuse, that can have a very significant impact. I think that the body cams are helpful, and that there are too many instances in which, for whatever reason, body cam footage was turned off when the interaction with the public occurred that was questionable. So there needs to be consequences for not having your body cam on. And obviously the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights needs to be revamped. And I understand a commission was just created yesterday to study changes to the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, but it's too difficult right now to terminate bad apples.
Do you think that some of this movement is actually solidifying those people who are opposed to change to go behind a law and order kind of approach?
Do I think the protest is solidifying conservatives?
I don't think so much the protest, but I think in use of the slogans get everywhere, right? It's saying defund the police, which then hardens, I think, some people about any kind of reforms, rather than talking about it in a sense of reforms. And actually, when you look at the reforms, those are providing the police with better tools and removing some of the more questionable roles from them and allowing them to do policing.
I don't know. It seems like to me the protests have had a very positive impact in educating people who haven't experienced abuse, who didn't really understand the extent to which police departments have been accused of abusing their powers in the minority community. I think that the worldwide protests are causing a lot of people to move to the left on these issues and agree that changes are needed, and helping people to realize the sheer numbers of people who've been killed by the police, so that changes will be made. I'm really buoyed by the extent to which people have expressed outrage and called for change.
What do you see? And when we started, you talked about being optimistic, and again, you're saying that as well. Where do we go from here?
We go, well, I think yesterday was a great start in creating a commission to study the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. I think that we need to even step up our level of recruitment and hiring of more minority officers. We need to enforce if you see something wrong, even if it's your partner, you have to report it. You have a mandatory duty to report it. And if you fail to report it, if you sign on to a false report of what happened, that's your job too. All those kinds of changes can help. And what else?
What's happening?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask about Providence and some of the things you mentioned, some of the reforms that are going on in Providence. What kinds of things have been happening, and what have the results been?
Well, I think that in Providence, there has been a commitment for recruiting minority officers. And I know that longtime Providence resident, Cedric Huntley, was very actively involved with participating in the recruitment process and with the training of new officers. My sense is that new officers receive appropriate training, but then in the real world, they see things that might be not totally compliant with the training, and it becomes part of the culture, because there's some officers who kind of brag about how tough they are and how physical they get with the community. So some officers can learn some bad things if they hang out with experienced officers who've been doing things the wrong way for a long time. I think that our criminal justice system is designed in a way that simply cannot, it's overwhelmed right now. You know, the poor can't get a trial. It's, you know, they're in between a rock and a hard place these days. You get arrested for a crime, you can't get a trial. You either have to appear in court a dozen times. Ultimately, all the weight of the government is to pressure you to enter into a plea agreement where you admit to some wrongdoing when, if you went to trial, you might be able to prove that you didn't do anything wrong. So I think our criminal justice system is failing us right now. And similarly, I think we have a lot of problems with our civil legal system with respect to discrimination. You know, if you want to file a lawsuit for race discrimination in America, our United States Congress says you have to first go to an administrative commission. You can't go directly to court. That's unlike 90% of all other kinds of lawsuits. The statute of limitations for race discrimination is one of the shortest in the world. It's less than a year. If you don't complain about race discrimination within 300 days of when you were last discriminated, you don't have a case. And that's juxtaposed against victims of pedophilia who just had their statute of limitation enlarged to at least 35 years. And victims of sexual harassment, now rules have just been changed so that their statute of limitation is enlarged and they don't have to exhaust administrative remedies. They can go directly to court. So also, if you're a victim of discrimination and you win a case or you negotiate a settlement, what you receive is taxable as income. Whereas if you get into a car accident, whatever you receive in your personal injury settlement, non-taxable. So in every category that there is, being a victim of race discrimination is harder to be compensated than in most other kinds of lawsuits.
Do you find that because of those situations that people are less likely to file?
Most people don't understand how extremely difficult it is to prosecute and prove a race discrimination case. You have to prove what someone else was thinking, all the while that defendant is adamantly denying that race was a factor in how they were thinking. And nowadays, everyone knows that overt racism is against the law, and so they mostly avoid the use of racial slurs or having any smoking gun evidence. And so it's all based on circumstantial evidence and comparing how a person of color was treated compared to a similarly situated white person. And the way the law is being interpreted, a similarly situated means almost exactly like a twin. Like just the fact that you work in the same company isn't enough. You have to have the same job title, be working the same schedule. It's the splitting of hairs on what is required to be proven in a race discrimination case is one of the most difficult burden of proof there is. On paper, it's by a preponderance of the evidence. In reality, it's almost the same burden as beyond a reasonable doubt. So there are many articles on myths of race discrimination cases. A lot of people think that people are winning huge amounts of money, and the reality is they're not. And many plaintiffs in race discrimination cases, when they get to the end of the road, look back and say, I never got an apology. It never resulted in changes with the offending employer. This was not as satisfying and fulfilling a process as it should have been.
When you take a look out in the professional community, in the legal profession, in corporations throughout Rhode Island, and through businesses throughout Rhode Island, it still is more difficult for someone, for a minority of any kind, to be able to move through these systems. And we find this. I presume we don't have many more than 40 African American lawyers in Rhode Island.
I think that's an accurate ballpark number. Yes. And
out of how many thousand?
Out of about 7,500 lawyers in Rhode Island. Yep, 40 or 50 out of about 7,500.
It was when I did a series of stories at Providence Business News that actually were pretty widely received. I won an investigative reporting award from the New England Press Association for it, but it never made a difference. Where we took a look at a lot of the law firms, and we looked at how many minority and women lawyers there were, and then how many had achieved partner status in those firms, and it was of course very few. And then looked at programs around the country that some people had put in to try and improve the situation for minority lawyers. Do we have any organizations that are doing that in terms of lawyers? But then there are also other professions as well that are also underrepresented.
I imagine I have heard of some of the big firms trying to be more proactive about recruiting minority lawyers. I had a young lady who was a law clerk for me who went on to go to Columbia Law School, and she was heavily recruited by a big law firm in Manhattan. There are some big firms that value diversity. I can't say that I'm personally aware of any programs in Rhode Island. I've read about programs in the American Bar Association, but by and large, each attorney stands on their own merit and their own relationships with the employer they have. I do see in my work in prosecuting race discrimination cases for employees that there are some very big employers who chew minorities up and spit them out, and who knowingly and intentionally have set up a workplace where minorities, for example, that they're assigned to perform certain tasks that result in less earnings, and they're stuck in that lower tier. And if you look at the employer's workforce, only a very small 2 or 3% ever rise above the lowest tier of job title in that company.
So I guess that brings me around to something that I know you represent. You have your law firm. You're in South Providence. You're an example to young people in that community of what they can become. But we don't have a lot of people who are in a position that are going back and helping to give rise to some of these young people and show them the possibility for opportunity, if opportunity even exists.
I had a young man who his physical appearance looks like Obama, and he is originally from Ghana, and he is a teacher of fourth grade students in a predominantly minority school. He was introduced to me by his aunt, who is someone I know, and she asked me to mentor this young man. And that was about 2 years ago, and I have regular phone calls and social interaction with this young man, and encouraged him to apply to my alma mater, Antioch School of Law in Washington, D.C. And he sat in my office and he looked at this painting behind me. I don't know if you recognize who that is.
I don't.
You know, I jokingly tell some people that it's Milton Berle, but it's actually Thurgood Marshall.
Ah.
And so he sat in my office and we talked about Thurgood Marshall's impact on the civil rights movement and what I do. And he said, Casby, I want to do exactly what you're doing. I want to, provide legal representation to the minority community and fight for civil rights. Unfortunately, this young man did not get accepted. His LSAT scores were not quite high enough for him to get accepted into Antioch. He does have 2 other schools he's waiting to hear from. But the point of the story is, yes, I am mentoring that young man, and there are several other younger lawyers who've passed the bar, lawyers of color, who I have made it a point to reach out to and ask them if they'd like to work on some of the bigger cases I'm working on. And they've jumped at the opportunity to be involved with some cases that involve depositions and, serving motions and arguing cases and briefs. So I'm interacting with younger lawyers and trying to do what I can. And of course, I've trained one myself. My daughter is 35 years old, and she works for Legal Services in Worcester, Massachusetts, representing people who are so disenfranchised that they need help getting housing and getting driver's licenses reinstated and things like that.
Casby, we've talked about Providence, and I want to just touch on briefly other areas of the states, smaller communities, places like Newport or Westerly. What do you hear from those communities, and whether or not there is a sensitivity towards the minority community in policing and in other areas within those communities?
Well, let's see. The number one thing I hear is that Portsmouth and Tiverton are hotbeds of arrests for driving under the influence. It's like they have a huge, disproportionately, number of arrests for that offense than any place else. And I haven't heard any horror stories from our biggest industrial centers, Newport, Woonsocket, Pawtucket. So I would say that I don't really have a bead on how minorities are being treated in those places, but I know that we've had a couple of incidents in Providence where I know one of them, a young, like 26-year-old African-American by the name of Robinson, was beat up pretty badly back. This is probably about 6 or 8 years ago. Ultimately, that case got settled, and I don't know what the terms of that settlement was, but there was definitely a claim of abuse.
Casby, we've had you on a while, and we could go on for a long time. Let me, and we should certainly do this again, because you're not only a wealth of information, but you certainly bring a level of knowledge and passion for this community and this kind of work. What would you, at this stage, as you look out to these protesters, and the vast majority being peaceful protesters, what do they do next? In my mind, the next thing they do is they turn their feet into the voting booth, and into some of them deciding maybe they ought to get involved politically.
Yes, that would help. And, it takes an awful lot to just get up off the couch and to get out. And so I really applaud the level of commitment that they have. And obviously, you know, you look at Atlanta, and you know, in the last couple of days, they tried to vote. A lot of their polling places were closed. The lines were 5 hours long. The machines were broken. It seemed almost like an intentional obstruction of minority communities' right to vote. And to me, it actually was kind of blatant and motivated by, you know, orchestrated by the conservative right. I think that we on the left have to be more aggressive in defending our rights and stop letting the people who think that listen, we got to exercise our right to vote. So that's definitely one thing. I want to encourage, before you kick me off the air.
Well, I'm not going to kick you off, Casby. You be on as long as you want, but I don't want to exhaust you.
That wasn't the right words, but I want to encourage everybody to search their cable TV for the documentary 13th, which provides a very succinct historical explanation of how slavery morphed into Jim Crow, which morphed into mass incarceration, which has decimated or severely adversely affected the minority community today. And I think it's going to be a great educational tool. It should be mandatory viewing for all the schools, the documentary entitled 13th, which was referring to the 13th Amendment, which allegedly freed the slaves.
You mentioned the schools, and I think that's a key to whatever happens in the future through education. And I'm also reminded that if I'm correct, that police departments actually formed out of slavery. That these police departments were initially developed to catch runaway slaves.
That's right. Bring our free workers back, please.
Yeah. Ryan, you have any thoughts?
I would back up. 13th is available on Netflix. There's also, if you just Google 13th documentary, there are many stories where it will tell you where you can watch it for free if you don't have Netflix. Highly suggest everybody watch it. It should be in your next rainy day watching viewing party. It's not quite a party, but it's educational, and everybody should be watching that film right now.
Thanks, Ryan.
You got it.
Casby, I want to thank you very much today, and good to see you, my friend. And we will catch up soon.
My pleasure, Frank. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah.
All right, Casby. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care, Casby.
All right, Frank Prosnitz. Great conversation.
Yeah, I think Casby's a great person. I've known him for a lot of years, and I'm happy to consider him a friend. A very bright guy who, the work he's doing is really terrific. And so, good conversation.
And this is the joy of live video is sometimes you catch, you get raw and real conversations, and nothing is scripted here. And we follow the conversation and go with the conversation wherever it leads us.
Exactly. And this is a great format, and it's great to be able to watch somebody that you're interviewing, to have that ability to change course during the interview, and just I guess just a really terrific forum. And I feel embarrassed not recognizing Thurgood Marshall and his portrait behind Casby, but
it's all right. I was in the background here and trying to figure out who it was as well, and his head was blocking a little bit of it.
Yeah,
glad he pointed it out. So, all right, that's going to do it for this edition. You can catch it on our website, whatsupnuke.com, on our YouTube channel, as well as on our Facebook page. We put all of our videos there. We'll go back and watch any portion of this. Please share it with your friends. And again, tomorrow we'll have another one of these with Rick Lombardi. And then Frank and I are setting up a bunch of them for next week. If you have any suggestions of who we should be chatting with, Ryan@whatsupnuke.com is my email address, and we'd be happy to chat with anybody here in the state of Rhode Island. So, all right, Frank, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.